Let me begin with this question. All three of you, in one way or another, are saying that people should vote for you because we need more women in the United States Senate. If all three of you are elected, or just one of you is elected, is the Senate really going to be that much different? Let's start on the West Coast with Dianne Feinstein.
I think we have a chance to move it toward a change. I think out in California, Bob, the big issue really isn't gender. It's an agenda for change, because California's economy now has a 9.8% unemployment rate, with about 740,000 people losing their jobs since 1990. So the real issue is moving the economy, and the real family value out here is a job. And I think we've got to move away from the supply side rhetoric of the 80s and be able to put people back to work and invest in our economy. That's the issue in California. Women are seen as spear throwers of change. We're not the same thing repeating itself. And I think many of us coming into the Congress will be coming in with some new programs to put the emphasis back on people in this nation.
Ms. Braun, do you think you can really change the Senate if you're elected?
Oh, I certainly hope we'll work hard to do so. I was in Southern Illinois yesterday, and a lady came up to me and said, you know, every time my husband goes grocery shopping, he spends $20 more than I do, and we don't get any more for our value. And the point that she was making, and did make, was that women have to manage a household. We can do better with managing this nation's finances, do better with managing this economy, with putting people back to work, and reflecting the kind of direction that Dianne Feinstein just mentioned.
Ms. Yeagle?
The issue in Pennsylvania is also the economy. The unemployment rate here is 8.2%. It's been consistently higher than the national average, and the people of Pennsylvania also are looking for new leadership. We've lost 400,000 manufacturing jobs in this state since 1980, when my opponent went to Washington, and $16 billion in federal funding. And those dollars for housing and education and economic development are terribly important. So I think that we share the same priorities of really turning this economy around, focusing on families, investing in people, and we have new leadership to bring to the Senate. So I believe we will significantly change the Senate for good.
Let me ask you, Ms. Yeagle, do you think that gender counts in a voter's decision now? How much does it count? And is it a plus or a minus for you?
Well, let me say, I think that it's terrific to be a woman running this year, and that's something that I think none of us probably could have anticipated. But the news to me seems to be not that women are running, but that there are only 2 women in the United States Senate. I mean, I think it's pretty extraordinary that in 1992, only 2% of the Senate represents 52% of the population. So I believe that's the news, and that what we need to do is to really change the composition of the Senate to reflect this population and bring new perspectives and new leadership and new experiences really to bear on solving the nation's problems.
Ms. Braun?
Oh, absolutely. We can open up the Senate, we can have change, and women can nurture this economy and this country back to health. I think that's the sense that I get on the campaign trail. People have a sense that women will be change agents, that we can open up that process, make it work better, get rid of the gridlock, make our policies reflect the concerns of the American people. And for that reason, while women are not getting accepted, in my opinion, just based on gender, you have to go and prove that you're the most qualified candidate for the job, that you know government, that you can make government work for the people. But once you've made that, voters are showing a greater acceptability of women and their competence to manage government.
Ms. Feinstein, is gender a plus or a minus for you? There are 2 women running for the United States Senate in California, and your opponent has suggested, sort of suggested, maybe that's 1 too many.
Well, my opponent obviously would rather have it another way, but let me tell you how I see it. 2 years ago, I ran for governor, narrowly missed it. It's a very different climate out there in California today. People are hurting. They're looking for change. It's really the first time in my political life that I have found that being a woman isn't a disadvantage, that people don't look at you any longer as if something were wrong with you for running, as if you don't belong there. And many people look and say, you know, there's so many men back there, and we don't see anything happening. And there's the gridlock and the finger pointing and the hyper-partisanship and the absolute absence of any kind of leadership. So they say, well, maybe it is time to give them a chance. Just maybe they can do what hasn't been able to be done. And if you noticed, Bob, on our opening statement, you have 3 women that are very concerned about the economic well-being of the people of their state, not the bottom line of profit, but the people of their state. And I think you're going to be surprised when we get there at how well we're able to work together and program together to see that bills like women's health equity and health care reform and being able to invest in our country, in the infrastructure, all of us are interested in seeing that we build the technology, that we build the schools, that we build the worker retraining that we need to make this country truly productive in the next decade.
All right, that's a good place to take a break. We'll talk about all this some more, and we'll talk about the economy and proposed solutions to it when we come back. And we're back talking about what some are calling the Year of the Woman in American politics, with 3 female candidates for the United States Senate. As we've seen the role of women change in America, we've seen new questions and new issues come up in politics. One of them is the role of spouses in American politics. At the Democratic and Republican conventions, we saw wives of the candidates being given a prominent display. They made speeches and so forth. Lynn Yankel, let me ask you first. Do you think that is proper? If you were nominated for president, for example, would your husband, would you want him to speak to the convention?
Well, I would ask him. I would ask him if he wanted to. But actually, I think that what we really need to do in this country is to concentrate on the candidates themselves and on what each of us has to bring, the kind of experience, the kind of perspective, and the kind of leadership. And so I think it's wonderful that Hillary Clinton is a different kind of first woman, I would prefer to call her, because she is someone who has had a very successful career and who has done many important things for children in this country. And so I think it's great that we have a different role model, but really it's Bill Clinton who's running and Al Gore, and I think we should concentrate on them, just as I believe in the Senate races that we should focus on each of us as individuals and the platforms that we have with us and the things that we can contribute. For instance, the education system is one of the things that I'm very concerned about, and I feel we need to put at the top of our national agenda. And I think that I have particularly good perspective to bring some new solutions to education and restore federal funding, and that is an issue that is my particular interest.
Ms. Braun, do you think that the Republicans, it was good politics to target Hillary Clinton for so long and so hard as they did, or do you think it might backfire?
Well, I would hope that everyone will be able to see through that ploy, because it really just confused and clouded the issue. The question is Bill Clinton's capability to be president of the United States of America, and that's the issue before the voters. All the rest of this fooling around between Murphy Brown and something that Hillary Clinton may have written 19 years ago, all of that really is just a smokescreen to keep from discussing the real condition of our country and the direction in which we're going to go.
Well, having said that, Ms. Feinstein, do you think perhaps the Democrats made a mistake or the Clinton campaign made a mistake in seeming to sort of put Hillary Clinton in a more low-key way and in some ways almost sort of trying to reshape her public image?
Oh, I don't know about the reshaping. I think that's really probably sort of a press conclusion. I think a lot of the emphasis on the spouses, frankly, are nonsense and smacks of some real desperation. I think most people that have been in this arena understand that the decision maker, himself or herself, makes the decisions. And that's the philosophy that's brought to bear. These are the policies that are carried out. The spouse, whether it be a woman or a man, is the helpmate. You're there, you're part of a pair, you're supportive, and all of that. But the real decisions are made by the person in public office. And I think to suggest otherwise, it really shows some desperation.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the economy. in the past, our surveys have shown that women candidates have tended to do less well when the economy became the issue on which the election turned. Lynn Yackel, you're a newcomer to politics. How can you change that? How can you propose something different on how to deal with the deficit and with the recession we're now in than has already been proposed? And is that a problem for you?
Well, it's not a problem for me at all. I have a very clear 6-point economic recovery plan which focuses on tax reform and on providing an $800 per child refundable tax credit, which will really benefit working families and will particularly benefit families at the lower end of the economic ladder. I also have a plan for helping small businesses, which I think we've got to have federal leadership in doing. We've got to provide tax incentives and investment incentives to really help small businesses get started and grow, and that will be a great stimulus to the economy. And I have been running a nonprofit organization for almost 12 years and have built it from a very small organization into a national model. So I know how to manage scarce resources efficiently and effectively, and I believe that's a skill we could certainly use in Washington. I also think, though, that we need to look at the people side of the equation in the economy and really invest in people as our comparative advantage for the economic future of this nation, but also for the quality of life for individuals in this country. So that is a high priority for me.
Let me ask each of you, and could I ask you to give a short answer because we're coming close to running out of time. If Bill Clinton is elected and comes to the Congress next year and says, I simply have to raise taxes and I have to go beyond what I've proposed so far, would you be willing to support him in that? Would you at least be willing to give him a listen on it? Let me start with you, Ms. Feinstein.
Well, my very strong feeling is I would be a no vote on any tax increase for someone earning less than $200,000 a year. These are the people I believe that were the most hurt in the 1980s by the tax reform. And so I would be a no vote on anything below $200,000.
With us in our studio now here in Washington is the Democratic Senator from California, Dianne Feinstein, who has some very different views, certainly I know on this business of the assault weapons ban because you were the sponsor of that ban. But let me ask you first about what you just heard Mr. LaPierre say about he wants to separate his organization away from these militias. Are we hearing something new here, Senator?
Well, it's the first time I've definitively heard a comment to that extent, and I think that's hopeful. I think that's the course they should take, because one of the things that's becoming more and more evident is that there are extremist groups out there. They are stockpiling weapons. They are going into military exercises to wait for the command to do whatever the commander tells them to do. And I think that the National Rifle Association, if they are a respectable group and want to be a respectable group, they don't want to associate themselves with something that may end up in a real tragedy.
Do you take these groups seriously? I mean, do you think they do pose a serious threat?
I think it depends, and it's very hard to tell. Right now, the public information is just beginning to come out on them. In my state, we are told by one newspaper that there are as many as 27 separate militia groups. I would say that the intelligence that authorities have on these groups is probably very weak, that we really don't know the extent to which they are a danger in the sense that they might take the law into their own hands.
Let me ask you about the assault weapons ban. Obviously, as Mr. LaPierre said, the National Rifle Association is going to continue its push in Congress to get that ban lifted. Do you think they can be successful?
No, I don't. I can say, based on my vote count, and I'm a pretty good vote counter, that we have more than enough votes in the Senate to stop a repeal of the assault weapons ban.
Is there a reason for that? Has something changed? Because I remember how acrimonious this debate was last year when you put the ban on.
Yes, I think it's a good point. I think things have changed. As I go from member to member and ask them about their position today, I have members that tell me, even though they didn't vote for it the last time around, they would not vote to repeal it because they believe it sends the wrong message. I'd like to just say something, you know, about the comment we've heard that the assault weapons ban is so cosmetic, doesn't mean anything. Then why is the National Rifle Association so upset about it? let me say another thing. If they believe that this is violative of the Second Amendment, why don't they take it up in court? In fact, I think they know that it does not violate the Second Amendment. And that's the reason why they're using it in a public relations way, rather than in a way that our law provides, which is if you think something is unconstitutional, take it to court. This is a very affluent organization, lots of money, can afford the best attorneys money can buy. The way to settle these problems is to go to court. This is a society. Our dogs have licenses. We regulate baby toys. We regulate automobiles. We regulate the kinds. You can't put a Formula One automobile on a freeway. And yet, their position is there should be no regulation of guns, which killed 40,000 people this last year.
Do you think that it is Oklahoma City that has caused this change in mood that you're talking about?
I think what Oklahoma City did was startling in the American consciousness. I think the realization that it was other Americans that committed this kind of act, which is something that, I mean, how many of us could have thought that other Americans would go in and do this kind of thing? And the alleged connection between the persons arrested and militia groups. I think those things have awakened people's consciousness that there's something else going on in the country. We need to know more about it.
Do you also endorse what Mr. LaPierre said, that you'd like to see some hearings into these militia groups, what their intent is, what the scope of their activity is? Also, do you favor hearings into whether something went wrong at Waco with
Yes,
the ATF
I do.
agents?
I think in our society, when you have an event as major as that was, and there are criticisms about the event, that a hearing is in order. Now, the chairman of the committee on which I sit, the Judiciary Committee, Orrin Hatch, has said there will be hearings. So we are going to talk about Ruby Ridge and Waco, review the procedures, the practices, the protocols that go in place, and if there was a mistake, and I say if there was a mistake, you can be sure that the agencies will remedy and make some changes in their practices.
Welcome back to Face the Nation. We are joined now by Democratic Senator Dianne Feinstein. Senator, I want to start with what Wayne LaPierre was saying. He was saying that in these investigations into anybody who's on one of these lists, when they go to buy a gun, if it is pinged, and that investigations might be interrupted by this system, and that the director of the FBI, Mr. Comey, said that that was a problem.
Well, we've worked with the Justice Department in drafting this legislation, and the Justice has sent a letter supporting it and said that it gives them a new tool. I do not believe Mr. LaPierre is correct on this. But let me say this, John. This is really a national security issue. It isn't a gun control issue, and let me explain why. The FBI has about 1,000 ongoing investigations. John Brennan told the Intelligence Committee on Thursday in open hearing that ISIL is actively pursuing operations to commit attacks in the West and bring people into Western countries, whether it's through immigration, whether it's over the border, or in any other way. The fact of the matter is that it's well known that a terrorist can come into this country. They do not, they're not on the NICS list, which is the database of 10 situations where you can deny a gun. They're not there, and therefore buy a gun legally in this country. What this legislation does is give the Attorney General the authority that if there is reasonable suspicion that the person, when they do the background check, is a potential terrorist, the gun sale can be denied. It also has an appeal process, an administrative appeal process, as well as a legal process.
So that law, though, in this case, Omar Mateen wasn't on any lists when the purchase was made.
Omar Mateen would have been picked up by this. Senators Leahy and Nelson gave us an addition, which is very helpful because he was under investigation.
there is a part of our bill that would cover him as well.
So if you have been under investigation over some period of time, you would trigger.
That's correct.
And what's the time period there for?
There is no time period.
So if you've ever been looked at by the FBI?
That's correct.
Well, so then what about the fact that somebody could be looked at and they, maybe the FBI got it wrong? So now they never can buy a firearm?
Well, that doesn't mean that they would be subject to being pinged. They would look at it.
I see.
And I think, as we look at life as it is today and the possibility of attack, and we here in judiciary, we here in intelligence, the FBI, it's investigation after investigation. And if you consider the fact that over 500 arrests and convictions for providing material support or conspiring or one of these things has occurred, you know that these things are going on. And the only way we have of stopping them is good intelligence plus a kind of net that will pick up foreigners. On the watch list, and this is important, 99.9% are foreign. Less than 0.5% are Americans. So this essentially is the watch list, which covers the no-fly list, the selectee list, and others. It is mainly foreign names given by foreign intelligence agencies, foreign law enforcement officers, plus our own.
You mentioned the appeals process, and that one of the criticisms of this is that this is a list kept for a different reason. The people, it's now being used, and there are lots of people on that list. It's poorly kept. They shouldn't be on there. Nobody really knows how to get off the list. That there's a what people call a due process problem here. How do you solve that issue?
We provide due process.
And how quickly?
There is an administrative appeal, and you can go to a court. And that's the traditional appeal, and that is available in these cases.
But will it be easy? I mean, we're talking about basically a right guaranteed by the Constitution. So that's denied by an appeals process that people can get lost in. What guarantees can you give people that they would be able to get off this list quickly?
Oh, please. First of all, I'm saying that the great overwhelming part of this list, 99.5%, are foreigners. They come in, there's reason for them to be suspect. They'll go through the same appeal process anybody else goes through. I don't think there's any need to give them any special privilege on an appeals list. If their name is pinged and the Attorney General's office looks into it and makes a decision that there is compelling evidence, not necessarily probable cause, which is Cornyn's, but reasonable suspicion that this could be a terrorist threat, they can deny the weapon.
You mentioned Senator Cornyn's bill. Is that your disagreement on the Republican side, that the standard, explain what the problem is?
The standard is too high because you can just arrest the person.
Right.
So that would cut out a lot of people who are probable threats. And it has to be completed within 3 days, which Justice and others tells us is impossible to complete the process within 3 days.
Let me ask you this. The president has called for what he calls the assault weapons ban to be reinstated in the wake of this massacre. Where are you on this? That obviously is legislation you're responsible for. Can it come back? Are you working to bring it back?
Well, we wrote the bill that passed in 1993, was law for 10 years. After Sandy Hook, we wrote a modified bill, and it didn't pass. I think Senators Murphy and Booker and Blumenthal and Bennett and others who went to the floor made a very clear case to bring this back. Let me tell you what the problem is, and let me just be very candid. I debated Wayne LaPierre 24 years ago on the assault weapons legislation. I just ran into him leaving your set. I deeply believe that these weapons of war don't belong on the streets. And I've tried now 3 times. The question comes, how deeply embedded are members of the Senate and the House to the National Rifle Association? Because you will never be able to meet what the National Rifle Association wants and achieve anything that will take the AR-15, this Sig Sauer, And every year there's a new weapon, more dangerous than the weapon that came before it. So I think it's really the resolve of the people of America. 82% of people by test see the national security concerns and say, yes, use this terrorist watch list. Yes, give the Attorney General the right to stop a gun sale.
All right, Senator Feinstein, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, John.
And we'll be right back.